Well, welcome everyone. We are here for our next video in our viewer question and answer session series. I still don't know what I'm going to call this thing. We're here with Jacob from Minnesota. He's up in, I just was going to call it Minnetonka, and that's not even.
No, yeah, different place.
Mankato, Minnesota, and you're just finishing up seminary there.
Right, yep.
And I think some of these vocations that people are coming from are really intriguing because I think the questions are really derived from what people do and experiences you've had. So it'll be interesting. And guys, I really don't know questions before I jump into these. So I do get a little nervous. I feel like I'm going on a game show. Like today, I've lined up 7 interviews today. So I kind of feel like I'm going on Jeopardy, and I'm a little worried about my day and what is going to get thrown at me, but it makes me a little nervous. But cool, we're going to roll with our first question with Jacob. What's your first question for me?
Okay, well, having just finished up seminary and now going into the pastoral ministry, and as you said, it's usually kind of, I guess, very vocationally driven questions. What are some things that you, or I guess funeral directors in general, wish that clergy and faith leaders knew or understood, so that we could help out the best way possible during funerals?
That's such a good big question.
Yeah.
The relationship between the pastor or clergy or whoever's coming in to do a service and the funeral director is it's one that really needs to be cultivated. And it's where, if we're against each other, it really doesn't benefit anybody. And I've had pastors I've worked with that they come in with a chip, or they come in not understanding that it is a relationship, like we're all kind of in this together and it takes all the players to have one common part. But I've also had a lot of pastors tell me that they really don't teach you in seminary school or in, whatever your religious type schooling that you may go through. They don't teach funerals. It's kind of blown over, kind of like at, I don't know, when you get your driver's license, they don't tell you don't mess with a funeral procession and that you can get a ticket. So there's just areas that are kind of blown past because it's maybe not comfortable. Maybe it's hard to teach. Did you go over funerals a lot during your studies, or?
We did go over funerals. Yeah, we went through just kind of like various orders of service that you can do. We went through, we had a pastoral theology class as well that kind of delves into all the more personal aspects of pastoral ministry, and we talked about funeral and the grieving process especially. So I feel like we had we
some good,
at least had sometime.
Sometime.
I don't know comparatively how much it is.
Well, I'll tell you, so within the business, there's things we joke about as funeral directors, kind of things that are kind of like birds in our saddle a little bit. One is pastors showing up for the arrangement conference without us knowing and usurping our time. So I kind of do like if a pastor comes and sits in during our kind of information gathering part. That way the family is not telling some of the same information twice, and the pastor's kind of gleaning as much as we are. So when I go through an arrangement conference, I walk right through the person's life. It's more of a storytelling, not just fill in the blanks for me. I want to get a glimpse of who the person was, which is, I think, what every pastor should be doing, especially if they weren't a parishioner and they didn't know them well and know their kind of who they were, especially maybe if you only knew them later in life. There's a lot of life there to still learn about. So not having to reiterate that twice for the family is kind of nice. So you can gather a lot of information, but I've had pastors come in and really try and steer the family and direct them and give them misinformation. So then I'm having to say, well, actually, pastor, that's not, that's not correct. And that's not how it is. And I hate that because it makes me feel like I'm having to battle against them or kind of put them down in a sense in front of the family. And I don't like doing that, but they're telling the wrong thing. and they're giving
Right.
bad information. So it's good to be on the same page, especially if it's a new pastor that I haven't worked with and they just show up and I don't really know them. And all of a sudden we're trying to work together with a family in front of us. And it's not we're not working together well. So, if you know you're going to be working with family, if you know you want to come in during arrangements, if they've asked you, call over ahead and say, hey, just to give you a heads up, the family's asked me to come and be with them for a while. I know we haven't met. Can I show up 5 minutes early and just introduce myself? Or how would you like this to go? And just kind of see, because that's their arrangement conference that they need to accomplish what they need to accomplish. Most pastors will also step out and leave when we get to financials and all of that part of it. So it just depends. So that's one area I would say to really try and work with the funeral director. Also, trying to make it personal. This is a one-shot deal. Unlike people may get married twice, you only get one funeral. The word and faith definitely is a healer, but it's not everything. It's a component to it. And I've seen pastors rely too heavily on preaching, feeling like this is going to solve everything if just preaching. And I'm going to just stuff the word of God on you. You're going to be fine. And I've seen it too often. And you walk away from the service and you didn't really learn anything about the person. Their life was not reflected on. You feel like it could have been for anybody. So really making it personal, I think, is what benefits the family more. I think there needs to be that faith part, especially if it's in the church. They want that faith part, but it's not the only part. As we say, some pastors we think just want to practice for Sunday.
Sure, yeah.
There's sermon time for them. And there's pastors who aren't good at connecting with families, especially if it was somebody they didn't know. Like they just don't know how to, and that's fine. We don't, you can't expect everybody to be good at that, but maybe then understand and have the humbleness to say, would someone from your family like to get up and share some stories for a few minutes? Or would someone from your family like to do this? If you do an open mic, understand you need to control it, because I've also seen pastors, we're going to have an open mic. And then like an hour and a half later and a 30-minute rambling from Aunt Betty about her cats that had nothing to do with the deceased because the pastor didn't know to control it. So there's things funerals can really go sideways if the person that's up in the front doesn't kind of control and make sure it's managed and stuff. So it's really important to have it under control, and you only get people's attention for about 30 minutes as you in any public speaking class. Like after that, they're gone.
And that's under like good circumstances.
Any circumstances. Yes.
Right.
So, you get people who are like, I want 5 songs and thinking music is great, but sitting and listening to music where all you're doing is staring at the front of a room, it's not as powerful as some people may think. Some songs are, but it gets long and it gets old and you get kind of just, let's keep this moving. So there's a lot of things you can do, and it's not just pastor, it's funeral director and working together and figuring out what service, if it's going to be in the funeral home, you and the funeral director have to work together to make sure the sound's good and the music is good and everything, because we hear stories about funeral director or pastors coming in and like, this is what we're doing. You're going to do this. And it's a relationship. It's not just an order taking session where the pastor is in charge of, the world here kind of thing. And encounter that. So, and don't call the funeral director a twit.
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Somebody called me that. So maybe I had a twitty moment. I don't know, but don't call anybody that. It's not really.
Oh.
So yeah, does that answer your question? I feel
it gives me
that was a really good question. That was a good one.
I appreciate the answer. Yeah, it's very helpful. We in one of our homiletics classes, we wrote a practice funeral sermon, and I
Yeah.
found it was incredibly difficult to write a funeral sermon without having a person to write about, an individual.
Yeah.
And so I actually wrote, with his permission, I wrote it about one of my fellow seminarians. So
It's much easier once you have
oh yeah,
context to do
absolutely.
it.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, and I think even people think, oh, I can't just use the 23rd Psalm every time, or I can't, but you have to find new spins on it. Like after, 20 some years of listening to funerals, I still every once in a while will get a pastor who just drops something and I'm like, whoa, that was deep. Like, and it makes me even really think about death and life in a new way, because they just put a new spin on something and they explain it in a different way. And I think you always have to keep reinventing yourself, especially if you do a lot of funerals. You get into some churches where an associate pastor, that's kind of their role. They're the funeral person. And if you're doing even 2 funerals a week, even just 1 funeral a week or 2 a month, it could get redundant where you are reinventing yourself with every family. Ask for the person's Bible, if they'll let you take their Bible, because you may find markings and things in there that were important to them, that the family didn't even know about. So just always soak in your surroundings. If you go to the home, look at things hanging on the wall, because you may see that they have a specific scripture on the wall hanging that was maybe important to them, or something that you can reflect on and use to base everything around. There's a lot that you can, I think, derive off of, that I've found for, when I've had to do services and preach the whole service, there's always fun little things that you can pull from to, base everything on, to make it really unique for the person. And it'll fall together once you really dive into some of those little things. So.
Sure.
What's your number 2?
Okay. So, given that obviously everybody is different, all the relationships are different, and everyone grieves differently.
Yeah.
But in general, does having a viewing with the body, is that helpful for loved ones to get, kind of work through the grieving process, to get through maybe denial of the death in the first place?
Yeah, definitely. So when you look into, the stages of grief and all of this, there's things that are proven. We were not meant to process death. Like, our systems were not meant to process something like that. So we all are going to, like you said, take it in, work it around, and come back differently. Grief, though, they have shown it doesn't even start till 2 weeks after the person dies. So at the funeral, going through any grief, you're still in this numb fog. So it's about 2 weeks after, when everybody else has returned to their life, you are now starting to try to take a step forward. And that's when everything really settles in, that, oh, that person's not there. This is not, like, your head and your heart and everything is kind of starting to catch up to each other. And that's when you really start going into the grief process, because those first few weeks, you may be angry those first few weeks, you may be, sad, you may be whatever, but you're not really into the grief process till about 2 weeks later, is what everything is kind of shown. And what was the rest of your question? I was thinking of that. Oh, viewing. So, and there's also proof in seeing is believing. When you tell somebody that somebody is gone, it's a concept. There is no tangible ability to really take it in until you see their body without them as a person present with that body. And that's why with kids, you can tell a kid all day long somebody's dead, they're in heaven, they're whatever. That means nothing to them conceptually until they can see that person with no emotion coming out of them, no emitting, smiles and laughter and anything, because that's to them will set in even with animals, that's how animals know. They see the person and they know. Like there's something about seeing and knowing for you to be able to accept and move later. Everybody who's died, I know me personally, that I've known people and I haven't been able to see them, like go to the service or something. I know that I'll see people and it catches my eye still that, was that them? Was that, what if that was them? Like there's always, I think, a lingering that maybe it's not 100% true.
Right.
You don't see it. I can only imagine with parents who have kids who die in car accidents and they say, I don't want to see them, or they can't see them because of their condition. Like, see a hand, see a foot, like, your kid's hand and feet, your kid's thumbnail, like, your child's, see something. So you have some tangible to put in your brain that you're not questioning ever. Maybe it wasn't my kid. Maybe it's that, maybe that always lingers, I think, if you don't see or you don't have kind of some concrete finality. So I fully believe in it. The whole, it's going to be easier not seeing them. Whatever people want to believe in works for them is something, but I've seen too many times the proof of seeing really it helps a person move forward a little more quickly into the next phase of what they need to do.
Okay, sure. Yeah. And I was just seeing, just over the last year, we had a few funerals at the church, and just sort of noticing some of the differences maybe between when there is the body present for viewing and when it's an urn of cremains.
Like a memorial.
Yeah. Yep.
It's
and
very
just,
different.
Not that I really noticed anything in that moment, but just looking back on it, I was curious if
it's different,
having the
and
body
it's a
there
different
to see
feel. It's a different feel, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It's a very different feel to the event. Not that one is good or, there's not a good, better, best, or that you have to weigh them. It's just, it is very different. So, yeah. Switch number 3.
Okay. This one might be a bit bizarre.
Okay. Bring it.
Okay. So I've heard examples of people after death requesting that their bodies be put to some practical use, and maybe in a more unique way than donating to science.
Okay.
Such as the one that really started this question in my head was, I heard of maybe 10, 15 years ago, an artist had donated his skull to a theater company to be used in performances of Hamlet, when Hamlet is Skull of Yorick.
Yep.
And then also seeing, when I went on a trip out to Boston, there's the Athenaeum Library, and they have a book that's bound with human skin in that library. And then also thinking back to Victorian era traditions of braiding jewelry out of the deceased hair. There's probably a lot of legal issues dealing with this, but do you have any examples from your experience of unique kind of practical things like that?
I haven't done myself. I know there's been questions, and there are things that are coming out now. There are still hair wreaths. There's a woman down, I think she's in Texas, that I've just been told about, that I'm hoping to connect to here as time allows, that they do these hair wreaths, and it's this really intrinsic, braiding and turning it into flowers and all this stuff of a keepsake. There's now, saving tattoos, where they'll excise out a person's tattoo, dry it in a certain way, and frame it for a family member to keep. But there are the legal, who is going to do the excision, going to do this process. They do have people who do it, but I know I do not want to do, because it borders on the moral and ethics of funeral director and the legal of desecrating a body. So, who is going to get this permission and allow this? And, is my paper that they're signing their name to good enough that somebody can't come back and sue me for doing this? And So I think especially in today's age where there is this lawsuit, heavy society we live in, and this blame society. So 50 years ago, that wasn't quite the case. So you could do more maybe, or, some of those people would just say, okay, let's give it a try. Some of that was, 100 years ago and much further ago. But I think that some of that stuff is there. Are you going to find somebody who's going to allow it? And are you going to find somebody who will do it? I had a gentleman, no, it was a girl, said her brother was requesting that his skull be saved after he died. And I'm like, that's great, but who's cutting off his head?
Right. Yeah.
It's that of who. If you can answer who, then we can look into the rest, because it's not even legal issues, but who's going to do this action? I'm not cutting off somebody's head for you. Like, I'm sorry, I'm just not going to do that. So I think if you figure out some of that, but I mean, even removing people's teeth, they come in and say, hey, will you take out the gold from my loved one's teeth because I want to keep the gold? Well, it sounds great in concept, but once you tell the person you are actually making less money from that gold than you are paying to have it retrieved, because I'm not pulling out teeth. You're going to have to pay a dentist to come on their personal time, pay their fees to extract the gold, send in, and the price of gold is not that much, because they're not like solid gold, and you don't get that much from it. And then they're like, oh, well, we'll just leave them, I guess. And so concepts, I think, sometimes are more grand than once you actually play it out and talk it through with the family. And some people will say things and you're like, okay, well, why do you? Just like, hey, I want to embalm with you. I want to be there when you embalm my loved one. Well, what is the root of why you want to do that? And I find that if you ask the why, you get to a different point than they actually, it's not that they want to see the whole thing. They want to make sure that such and such is happening, or such and such doesn't happen, or they want to make sure their mom's hair is washed. Like, they don't even realize what they're going to be seeing the rest of the way. They just want to make sure their mom's hair is washed, or that their mom's nails are painted. Well, if that's all you want to be part of, how about we schedule you to come in and do this instead of seeing me blood and inject chemicals and aspirate and do all these things that I'm pretty sure you don't want to be part of, because you don't even realize is going to happen when you're there. So I think that some of it is just communication and getting to the root of what they want to do, kind of like body donation as well. Okay, you want to donate your body to science. That's great. Have you read through the paperwork? Let's make sure we look through it, make sure you sign it, make sure you understand what you're doing. If somebody comes in with one of these like third party, I'm going to pack you on dry ice and send you across the country where they can do whatever, because it's not a medical school. Let's read through. Let me help you Google Better Business Bureau, and let's look into these things before you do them, and before we skin your mom and send her skin off to be, bound into a book or something. Let's talk about it. So I think communication is the big, because some people don't really realize the end of what it is they're thinking they want to do. But some things are great in the long run. They just, it's talking through how and who and where and such. So, and some of the concepts that are out there, like the body pods, that are not an actual thing that you can do, but everybody thinks they are, but they don't exist in reality. It's just this concept, but people believe it's there. So they think they should be able to do it.
Right.
Yeah. Well, cool. Those are good questions. I'm amazed at what you guys are bringing from all the different states.
Well, thank you very much for your answers.
Thanks.
Very great.
Thanks for your time. Well, thanks guys. Keep bringing the questions, and we'll see you on our next video. Bye.